nothing but Star Wars. Give me the Star Wars. Don't let them end.
Bienvenidos, worldwide fans of the planets, hottest entertainment with an edge. Jaime En Fuego here, welcoming you to my namesake program, Enfuegotainment. That's right, so stoked to have you here. You can just call me Fuego for short, and this is actually going to be my very first book review here on Enfuegotainment. I've primarily covered television and film and stuff like that, but here in the year of 19, as I am so affectionately calling it because I'm a crazy big Stephen King fan, I have been covering all things Star Wars leading up to Episode 9's release in December. So I've been doing one film a month, which is what I shall be continuing up until December. So thus far I have done the Clone Wars film, the animated one that was released in the theaters, and also the prequels thus far. Now I'm also going to be doing the two non-saga films coming up. So I'm going to do Solo, I'm going to do Rogue One, which is honestly my favorite of the post-Disney acquisition of all the Star Wars films. But the cool thing about Star Wars since Disney acquired them is how they have expanded the universe, even if they did relegate a lot of really cool stuff like the Thrawn trilogy to, its legend status now. So all the coolness like Shadows of the Empire, with Rendar and all that, and I mean all the Thrawn stuff with cloning the Emperor and that we got in Dark Empire, the comic book, all of that is no longer canon, although as we found out recently, we are going to get some Emperor flavor in Episode 9, which is super, super badass. But this is a book that just came out about a month ago. It's called Master and Apprentice. Yeah, so this is a prequel book, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. It's written by Claudia Gray. She did Lost Stars and Bloodline, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, neither of which I have read. And the point of that is because I'm going through everything kind of in timeline order with all of these reviews and this coverage and stuff like that. So now that I've got through the prequel films, I'm going to start doing some Clone Wars coverage, the television series, and I wanted to start actually checking out anything in that time period. This is a prequel period novel that centers on, it's called Master and Apprentice, and it centers on Qui-Gon Jinn and a very young Obi-Wan Kenobi when he is still a fresh Padawan. And I must admit I liked this book far more than I was anticipating because of the fact that it was set in the prequel era. I was like, I definitely had some qualms with a lot of the prequel stuff, and I will say up front that it does deal very heavily with prequel politics, and so that may not be quite as fascinating for some people. But the best thing about this book is that we get so much more backstory about Qui-Gon Jinn and the fact that Dooku was, his master, and he was the one who trained him. And we get some very cool backstory about another person who was actually trained by Dooku before he even took on Qui-Gon as his Padawan, and that's a guy named Rael, I want to say? Rael, I want to just double check his name. Avaras, that's right. And so he was actually, in comparison to this Rael guy, Rael, I don't know. I read it and I listened to some of the audiobook, and the dope thing about the audiobook is that you have just one narrator, but he does all the different voices. So I divided my time between this and the audiobook, but on the audiobook he's doing the Yoda voice, he's doing a great Qui-Gon voice, he does a great Obi-Wan voice, he does a great Dooku voice, and various others. And Rael Alvarez was just a fascinating character to me, because when you're taken into the Jedi Temple, usually it is at the youngest age possible. We're talking probably within the first year or so of your life, because they test you and for your midichlorian levels or whatever the hell all that nonsense that we got in the prequels was. And so Obi-Wan even mentions at one particular point in the story, he's like, wow, I thought that I was young when I came in, because I was only a couple of years old when they brought me in, but this Rael guy, he was 5, and so he had so much of his regular formative stuff already set in stone. And even as an adult, he's going around in these raggedy clothes and not dressing all super prim and proper and whatever like a Jedi. He looks like some just nasty smuggler, just grungy, whatever type of guy, but that it fits his personality. And he's on this planet called Pygel, where he's assisting this queen-to-be of sorts who's about to take over power of this planet once she reaches her specific age, and that is just about to hit. But there's a weird subplot with terrorist attacks, and yet the terrorist attacks are they're of varying levels of extremity. And so there's some stuff that seems more like just just pranks, and then there's other stuff that is like full on, like life-threatening. And so they're basically trying to figure out, okay, is this extreme former theater group part of these planned attacks and so on and so forth. But once these attacks start going down, Rael contacts Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon obviously, he's got to bring Obi-Wan with him, and so they go out to this Pyjo planet, which is really important to Coruscant and basically the entire Republic, because of the fact that it's right on this spot where they're trying to put like a I'm trying to remember the exact terminology. It's like some sort of like, speedy wormhole, whatever kind of thing. I know there's specific terminology in here. Don't beat me to death, Star Wars fans. But yeah, it's just in a very important portion. And so that's really the framing device that we get. We learn stuff about Dooku's Padawan, this Rael guy, before he brought on Qui-Gon. And we get a lot of this stuff with flashback, which is actually really dope. So there's some flashback stuff to back when Dooku was actually training Qui-Gon, and there is one bit in particular where there's a fight with this Darth something chick, and it's ironically on the same planet where Han Solo won the Millennium Falcon. The name of the planet is eluding me at this particular time, but it's the planet that he wins the Falcon in the card game from Lando in the Solo film, and that's also mentioned in a few other stories and whatnot. But it's really personally for me fascinating to get more Dooku stuff, because I thought that was a really cool character that was underserved, especially in just how quickly he was killed off in episode 3 at the very beginning. We didn't get enough Dooku, and I think Christopher was great, and very just an iconic actor, and brought a very interesting gravitas to that particular role. And so yeah, getting more Dooku is cool. And like where this story is told, like they still don't know what's up with Dooku, because Qui-Gon even mentions when he's talking with Rael a few different times, he's like, hey, have you heard from Dooku? Because he's left the Jedi Council and nobody knows like what he's up to. And it's really fascinating just to get that backstory, just to see how Dooku was so fascinated with Jedi prophecy, which a lot of the current members on that council in this prequel period before even Phantom Menace, because this takes place before Phantom Menace, they're like, looking too deep into prophecies. It's almost like, staring into the darkness, and the darkness, the Force can potentially consume you, because it's a very selfish thing to want to know what the future is and to, study these prophecies. And that's actually something Qui-Gon got from Dooku, and it's something that Obi-Wan doesn't understand. And that's another big plot point that we get in this, is just the conflict of interest as far as just mentality and approach, and just as far as what being a Jedi entails between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Whereas Qui-Gon is like, we can bend the rules here and there, whereas, Obi-Wan is like, how can we do that, Master? We have to stick to the protocol, and so on. And, Qui-Gon is so just invested in looking into these prophecies and that fascination, which obviously with where we know Dooku ends up going, that's almost like a very slight level of temptation with Qui-Gon, but yet he's still fascinated by it. And so that's an interesting dichotomy, because Obi-Wan doesn't understand his obsession, and, Qui-Gon is sending him, to look and investigate and do all this different stuff, and he thinks it's tedious, and, he just can't stand it. So that's one of the central themes here, is just the differences in mentality between the two different pupils that Dooku trained in Rael and in Qui-Gon, and then just the difference in just outlook and Jedi mentality that we get from Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And it's fascinating. I actually really dug the hell out of it. It's not super action heavy, with the exception of some stuff that we actually get. We get some interesting flavor, because there's these two jewel smugglers, these two thieves that it's this one guy who was trained and just basically raised by droids, because on this derelict ship that he was the only survivor on, there's all these different, C-3PO, type droids, and they basically raise him after all the other humans get killed on it. And he has hooked up with this woman who is a slave who has escaped, and that's another thing where it turns into prequel politics, because those two that I just mentioned, they're this, very, very drastically different duo as far as mentality goes. The dude trained and raised by droids is just, very, very analytical and impersonal and everything, and yet you know, the lady who has like this little attraction thing to Qui-Gon at one particular point, she's very emotional even if she hides them away a lot of the time. You hear the internalized stuff and whatnot, especially since, you know, she escaped slavery, and, you know, her biggest fear is returning to it. And so they go to Pygel because little dude has a hunch that there is oh goodness, the stuff that they make lightsabers out of, it's totally eluding me, but that particular crystal, he's pretty positive that there's an abundance of it there. And yeah, lo and behold, they get an answer, but they in turn kind of get tied up with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Kyber. That's right, Kyber crystals. And so yeah, it's just interesting how they end up having to join forces because of all of the other wackiness that's going down. There's a big seedy corporate company that has kind of had control of Pygel for a long time, and there's dissenting and differing views about the extent of their involvement and what it should be. And this is where, like I said, we get into the prequel politics, but, you know, as a whole, if you're cool with the prequels like I am, I don't absolutely despise them like some people. This is a very fascinating universe-expanding book, and just the stuff with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, especially if you dug their dynamic in that first film in The Phantom Menace, it fleshes stuff out well. Claudia Gray writes Qui-Gon so damn well, fascinatingly, in fact, and gives him more of like a shade of gray as opposed to being just purely light. But yet there's a really cool quote from the book here on the back of it. I actually have the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition here because it comes with this little poster and stuff, and that's what I like to do. I like to have a physical copy, and then I like to also have the audiobook because it allows me to read through things more quickly, and as I mentioned, the audiobooks are done really, really well. I'm very stoked to check out the Dooku one next that just came out, but yeah, I like tangible, physical media. I mean, I honestly like them both at this point, but I like going into a real bookstore and actually picking something up. And so the quote that I was referring to, and this is what we have on the back: "It matters," Qui-Gon said quietly. "It matters which side we choose, even if there will never be more light than darkness. Even if there can be no more joy in the galaxy, then there is pain. For every action we undertake, for every word we speak, for every life we touch, it matters. I don't turn toward the light because it means someday I'll win some sort of cosmic game. I turn toward it because it is the light." It's a compelling argument, you know, and, you know, he has, Qui-Gon has a very interesting quandary presented to him, and, you know, since it's mentioned in the little leaflet here, I'll just throw it out there. He's asked to become a part of the Jedi Council at the beginning of the book, and it's a big, just matter of aggravation for Obi-Wan, because if he joins the council, he is no longer going to be training Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan is kind of resentful of this when he first finds out, and he's like, "Master, you know, like, if you join the council, you won't be able to finish my teachings, and I'll have to be passed off to somebody else." And, you know, he even accuses him at one particular point of, you know, "This was your plot all along. This is why you've been so weird and distant with me and haven't instructed me in certain sectors," and so on and so forth. And, you know, it's something that was never touched upon before, but it just adds legitimate intrigue to the entirety of the festivities here. So I could continue talking about this book quite a bit, but I need to leave some stuff to mystery, obviously. I've just glossed over a few of the key plot points, but I did not do any spoilers in this, just to let you all know. I've just given you some of the framework of the storytelling, and I hope that that compels you to check out Master and Apprentice, written by Claudia Gray. A terrific novel, I must say, and I look forward to, once I get there in, you know, the actual timeline order, to reading Lost Stars and Bloodline and the other stuff that she has done. So I've been Jaime En Fuego, and you can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, obviously here on YouTube for Enfuegotainment. And if you want to see more spectacular stuff that I do, that is going to be at youtube.com/thehorrorshow channel, which you see just below. Unlike this channel, which I just restarted earlier this year and isn't even at a Jeezy, that channel is at over 26,000 subscribers and has been going strong for many years now. We do trailer reactions, film and television reviews, book reviews, comic reviews, convention coverage, video game let's plays. I mean, yeah, pretty much everything under the horror umbrella. But this is my outlet for the non-horror stuff that I still love and adore oh so very much. And yeah, I guess that's going to be the end of the proceedings. I'm about to film a comic review for the Darth Maul comic. Now, not the Darth Maul comic, which was from the unused episodes from the Clone Wars, the Darth Maul comic, which was done by Marvel, which was, it's a very cool prequel story about Darth Maul getting his first Jedi kill. And so yes, you can look forward to that, along with later this month on the 24th. May the 24th be with you. My review of Solo. So I'm going to have to do a variation on my typical sign-off, so I shall say hasta luego, cinemigos. Yeah, I guess this is cinema related, so that works. But I am hopeful that we get to reconnect sooner rather than later, and until then, may the Force be with you.